You know what I love? That we are now being forced to be immersed. I was just talking with one of my producers about the Squid Game and how there's like a lot of folk now on social media saying the translation misses the mark with some of the dialogue and with some of the character development that we wouldn't understand culturally. And I'm so appreciative of being introduced into a culture, but I'm also happy, like red light, green light, I played growing up. So to know that all halfway across the world, people who don't speak the same language, who don't eat the same foods, who may not pray to the same God, played the exact same game that I played as a child, tells me that what I already knew. We have more in common than we don't.
Yeah, and while I haven't seen, I think I'm probably the only person on the planet who hasn't seen Squid Game yet because I have little kids and I have to make sure that they're fast asleep when I watch it.
Facts.
Um, what's really cool to be able to see is just the diversity of programming, of voices that are now available to us. I mean, the fact that the number one show on the biggest streaming platform is a Korean language show. I never thought I would see that day, but it's really exciting because when we are offered the opportunity to expose ourselves to more diversity, I think that ultimately makes us smarter and better as a result. And it broadens and widens our horizons enormously.
Well, that's a nice segue into This Is Life. Let me welcome to the show for the first time. She is the host of This Is Life on CNN. New season coming up. It looks fire, y'all. Let me welcome Lisa Ling.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm gonna get you the applause that you deserve. And as you were speaking, the other thing that I'm wildly cognizant of is that my whole entire life, I could see myself in spaces where I never existed. So I grew up watching TV. I was talking about Abbott and Costello and Little Rascals, and there were caricatures and blackface versions of my humanity in some of these, whether it was the Ooga Booga, cannibals and Abbott and Costello or Buckwheat and Stymie, but yet somehow I was able to look past it and say, that doesn't represent me. Even when I didn't see myself on mainstream television, when I never saw myself presenting the news, I still somehow was able to insert myself into the humanity of books like Tale of Two Cities. Like I was an English major and I could see myself in it. So we were forced to find ourselves even when we weren't intended to be in something. And now we're seeing ourselves. So that I think is full circle.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, I also grew up with the TV on in my house all the time. My parents got a divorce when I was 7, and they worked all the time. So the TV was my favorite babysitter, and I loved it. I had it on all the time, and I always had aspirations of somehow being part of it. But no one on television looked anything like me except Connie Chung. She at the time, she symbolized all that was intelligent and elegant and graceful. And I thought, well, if I could have a career like hers, maybe I could have a better life. I mean, she allowed me to know what was possible. And if you ask most Asian American journalists of my generation, I would venture to guess that most of us will say that Connie inspired us to become journalists because she was really the only one that we saw on a national stage.
And then in New York, there was Kaidi Tung. There was
Yes,
Connie Chung and Kaidi Tung.
that's
Uh,
right.
and and that was cool, and I think Kaidi Tung might still be on television. I think
Yeah.
she I think she is, we're entering into an era that is both scary because I feel like we're heading towards a brick wall that's going to break us. But sometimes breaks are good, you come back stronger. I feel like we're in an inflection point in our country's history. This is, it's a very young country and countries have these dips. And I think we've had dips before, but this one I think is going to break us. What are your thoughts?
Karen, I'm a glass half full person, and I think that things are going to continue to be difficult for a little while because there's this reckoning that is happening in this country. And I think COVID, George Floyd had everything to do with it. And just it essentially peeled back the band-aid or pulled the band-aid off of these issues that have been festering and simmering beneath the surface for a very long time. And while I think that, we haven't overcome the ugliness yet because we're going through this reckoning, I'm optimistic that we are headed in the right direction, that we have to get dirty and we have to unearth a lot of these hard things if we are going to move forward. And I just think that even having these conversations, and having hard conversations, right, and our willingness to be exposed and also consume information and content that is diverse from perspectives that aren't the ones that we typically receive information from, I think is positive. And I'm actually hopeful for my kids' generation that we're going to get to a place where not only are we more tolerant of each other, but we thrive together.
Hmm. I love you for a lot of reasons, which is why I was excited to have this interview, because I think that part of the inflection point that we're in, part of the thing that we're heading towards that brick wall around, there's that Facebook where everyone's getting their news. There's news that's not quite news, but corporately run, algorithm driven, clicks and eyeballs, not fact, truth, and humanity. And that's not sustainable because media is the place where we find our humanity. Media is the place where we should be challenged to be better. And it has been part of the problem for the last decade or so. And so when you go out to tell a story, I know that you've done not just your homework, but there's going to be an entry point that not only am I going to learn something, I'm going to grow as a person. And that to me should be the model, not chasing dollars, investments, and algorithms and clicks, but truth and humanity.
Thank you so much for saying that, Karen. You know, our show, we are embarking upon our 8th season that starts on Sunday the 10th. And before this show, we had a show on Oprah's network OWN for 5 seasons. And we've always just been this little show that could. You know, it's never going to get the ratings that like the Kardashians get, but there has been a loyal audience that knows that when they come to our show, as you said, as you just said, they're going to be able to kind of like open the door a little bit and enter this world that they may have known existed, but maybe not known too much about. And I like to think that I'm just the vehicle through which you can experience these other worlds and cultures that are different from yours, but allow you to have an experience nonetheless. And I just think that because of COVID, in this age of social media, our human interaction, which is so important, has become so much more limited. And my hope is that people will come to our show and come with an open mind and be prepared to think differently, but hopefully with a little more sympathy, a little more empathy, because I think that if we don't start engaging with each other, we're going to continue down a really ugly and dark path. It's imperative that we do so. And if I can provide that window for people to better acquaint themselves with their fellow humans, then I take that responsibility very seriously.
We're talking with Lisa Ling, of course, the host of This Is Life on CNN. And this season, you're going to be tackling a lot of difficult topics, as always. The one that I wanted to talk first about is prostitution. It is that pornography, to me, and I know we can't get rid of it, but I feel like, you know, and I've had these battles because the women should empower themselves and this is their way of taking back their power. And I'm like, no, if you have the choice between selling your body and having a living wage that allows you to have the life that you want to live, I don't think 99% of the people out there would choose prostitution. And it only is there because men mostly demand it, right? This is a high demand.
Yeah.
So what do you learn? You said at one point this country was on the verge of legalizing it, which I think they should decriminalize. It shouldn't be women should not go to jail for prostitution. But
Yeah.
what did you find that we're going to lean into?
Well, so this season, season 8 of our show, we are doing something different than what we normally do, which is where every episode is going to be grounded in an episode in history or a moment in history that kind of gives us a sense of why we are where we are right now. And so we do an episode about this moment in American history during World War II. This when Union soldiers were down south, they in the
Wait, you
middle.
mean the Civil War?
Sorry,
Civil.
did I say Civil War? What did
No,
I?
you said World War II, but I'm
Oh
like
my
Union
gosh, I'm so
soldiers would be
sorry.
Civil War. I'm like,
Sorry.
wait a
During the
minute.
Civil War, yes, during the Civil War, Um, and the Union soldiers were having difficulty on the battlefield because so many of them were contracting sexually transmitted diseases. Because when they headed south, women from around the country also, and this still continues today when large throngs of men go into certain areas. Very often there will be women who follow along to service those men, and that's exactly what happened during the Civil War. And officials realized that if they regulated the selling of sex, and started imposing STD checks. Yes, this happened during the Civil War. They might be able to reduce the number of cases of STDs being transmitted, because during that time, if one of the soldiers contracted an STD, they could die from it. They could also be out of work for weeks on end. And so they did that. And the numbers of soldiers being able to continue, I mean, you actually saw a palpable difference after they regulated it. And so we use that moment in Nashville to look at where we are today and this movement to decriminalize sex work. There are those in the who consider themselves sex workers who are trying to fight for full legalization. There are others who want it to be decriminalized, and they say, look, it's never going to go away. At least we will stop persecuting the sex worker, because right now the way street sex work happens is it's very much under the control of these pimps who are trafficking these women, and they are the ones who are benefiting. And often women and those who are engaged are ending up arrested and with criminal records themselves. So it's sort of this exploration. Is there something that we can take from that episode to look at where we are today? And there was a palpable difference in the number of STDs and how sick soldiers were getting at that time.
How come we never heard? I paid attention during that Civil War class in history. Never heard this story before today. I'm today years old, learning about the prevalence of STDs among Union soldiers during. How did you find this story?
Well, we have an incredible team of researchers, but every one of our episodes this season are about moments that didn't make it into the history books. As we know, history is told through a certain lens. It's generally told through the eyes of the victors. And so as a result, so many hugely significant moments in history are left out. And the impetus for this season was during 2020. June of 2020, I was on social media and I started seeing people posting about Juneteenth. And I was embarrassed to say that I had known hardly anything about Juneteenth. I think I'd heard about it before, but I didn't really recognize that it was considered the official end of slavery. And that just compelled me to think, what other significant moments in history do we not know about? So every episode is grounded in an event.
Damon Lindelof's Watchmen, because he discovered that Tulsa, Oklahoma was decimated, government sanctioned, whole town wiped out, thriving town of Black folk. He was like, how come everyone doesn't know? So he made sure that was going to be the grounding force of Watchmen. And I'm glad that people are waking up. But it just speaks to, I guess, how, like you said, the victors get to tell the story. I guess it's not sexy to say that Union soldiers were contracting. And it's making me think, was it forced sex? Was it forced sex? Who were they having sex with? Was it the formerly enslaved? Like now you've opened a can of worms, and I want to dig in even more.
Karen, that's the objective of this season, that we will whet your palate and compel you to not only look in greater depth into these issues, but to just open your mind altogether about more moments in American history that were significant, because look, our history is so multifaceted and multidimensional, but we are only exposed to such a sliver of it.
And the trailer's fire, as I mentioned, the trailer to this season 8. of this. It's almost like This Is Us. This is life, but it also is This Is Us on CNN. You're also going to be tackling same-sex loving, gender-loving people, and how people homosexuality almost threatened or was a threat to our
National security.
democracy,
Yes.
national security. Okay, please,
Yeah.
please. What period of time was this?
So this was during the Cold War. You remember hearing about the Red Scare, right? The scare of communist
Is this
invasion.
McCarthy or is this J. Edgar Hoover? Is this both? Is it overlapping?
Both. This is
Okay.
both. Um, it was perceived at the time that people who were homosexual, they didn't even use the word gay. They called them homosexuals or those with sexual perversions might be easily corruptible by the communists. And so this massive purge of gay people started to happen in throughout the federal government, throughout the United States military, and tens of thousands of people who were accused of being gay were released from their jobs because they were feared to be a threat to national security. Now, I grew up knowing about the morality debate around homosexuality. I never knew that there was a time in American history when gay people were being actually targeted for arrest because they thought that they would were a threat to our national security.
I find that really interesting, considering that J. Edgar Hoover was known. People tell on themselves, Lisa Ling. Like you doth protest too much. Like you're targeting people while you dress in women's clothing, and you might yourself be a homosexual, a J. Edgar Hoover.
Exactly.
Strange, not really. That's how people tell on themselves. So we're gonna mount a crusade to get rid of these people. Don't look over here, is what he's saying, right? Don't look at me.
Exactly. And when we look now at how certain communities are targeted, are discriminated against for for no reason, entire communities, all we have to look back on is that period when gay people, for doing nothing whatsoever, for I mean, no one was ever proven during that time to have had any tendencies to rat on their government in any way.
What else that for you coming into the season? We're still in a pandemic, even though you are, we're slowly getting back out there. You're a brave woman, braver than I am, Lisa Ling. I don't know. I think I'm scarred. And I was having this conversation with my students too, because a lot of folk are gonna, are struggling with this kind of re-entry into society. And,
Yeah.
give us another entry point in history or story that really stood out for you this season that you're excited for us to know about.
One of my favorite episodes this season is about the Chicago race riots of 1919. So often when we open our newspapers, we read about the horrific levels of gun violence that Chicago is experiencing. And I think it's easy for so many people to just poo-poo it as gang related crime or black on black crime. But if you look at the Chicago race riots of 1919 and what touched it off, it was the murder of a young black man who was swimming in Lake Michigan, and he crossed this invisible line and swam into or floated into with his friends the white part of the beach, and how after that incident this riot ensued.
Wait, Lisa Ling, they stoned him though. They stoned him.
They stoned him,
They
and,
killed
and no
him.
one paid the consequences. No one was arrested for it, and housing became even more segregated right after those riots, and continued on. And then you look at the history of the housing projects, which essentially sort of forced Black people to live in these projects that were not taken care of, not tended to properly, and then when they wanted to gentrify, they decided, let's knock all these housing projects down so that we can allow these communities to middle class and upper middle class people to move into these communities, and we'll take everybody and just move them into neighborhoods that may have had existing issues, right? That people had no familiarity with. Well, what do you think is going to happen? And so there's a line that can be drawn from that race riot and the stoning of Eugene Williams, the young black man in Lake Michigan, to what's happening today. So that's one of my my favorite episodes is my hope is that when you read about statistics in Chicago, you never think about it the same way.
I appreciate that. I'm also like being very pristine with language. The summer of 1919 was called Red Summer in America because it wasn't just Chicago; it was all over, and it was almost like Rosewood. No, it's like this
Yeah.
domino effect.
Domino.
Why was So I love that entry point, but I think as Americans we need to ask that question. These weren't race riots; these were massacres of people who were able to disenfranchise a whole other group of Americans. And as a result, we have now a white middle class that has benefited, housing wealth that they've benefited from, and a host of other things because people have been pushed into ghettos and not being able to capitalize on, certain real estate benefits that others have.
That's right. It wasn't just the riots or the massacres themselves. It was all of the laws and all of the segregation that happened in the aftermath. The continual segregation of communities and the laws that prevented Black people from becoming upwardly mobile.
So are you pleased with where you are with this now? To watch the story arc of your career and where you started and how you came through. I'm like really excited by what you're doing. But are you, Lisa, is this what you envision for yourself, and what's next?
So this isn't what I envisioned for myself. I don't know what I envisioned for myself, but let me just say that it has been an incredible honor and privilege to be able to try and explain these moments in our collective history, to be able to dissect and figure out how these events have affected how we are, how we're living today. And it's exciting to me, Karen, to be able to be the arbiter for this information. And my hope is that people will watch, and and become a better person as a result, and have a better understanding of our fellow Americans and our fellow humans.
We all need to be more intentional about where we put our eyeballs, who we give ratings to, and if you really care about the future of this country, the future of this world, and you want it to be better, we need to start to watch en masse shows like Lisa Ling's This Is Life and all the other good journalistic, well-researched, truth fact-finding pieces of history, really, because you in the midst of telling us about history are also making history. So let's be intentional. Let's watch this on CNN. This is Life. This is Lisa Ling. I appreciate you so much in the work that you do. It's amazing. So are you.
Thank you so much, Karen.